Here it is, back again with another BB Reads. A theme song is coming up in my mind over these things now, and I'm really excited about that. But yeah, this is good evening. First off, good evening. Let me start there. I'm coming in with a lot of energy, but good evening. This is your blessed baby themselves, eye-kuh, coming back again with another BB Reads, where I share my thoughts and my insights on my library grab and goes. The last time I did some more psychological texty reads, to take just a short break in between my children's books phase. And I don't necessarily know if my children's books phase is over, because I absolutely love including that in my reading cycle. Like, I like to be able to switch back and forth. So I don't know if it'll be done yet. But to round out at least the most recent library haul that I am doing, that includes majority children's books. Yeah, I'm coming back with that. Coming back with that. I'm trying to make sure I'm saying everything. So to preface a little bit, because these books this time around was particularly special for me, and I didn't necessarily catch it as I was reading it, but they kind of came to me after. So much so that yesterday I was attempting to record this, and would you know that, so usually I try to do these on Instagram Live because it's much easier for me to just click the button, save, send it to post it. But, sometimes Instagram don't have your back like you think they would. And I ate my video, and I was doing absolutely, I was spitting some stuff. I was really getting in there. And yeah, Instagram ate my video. And that was pretty frustrating. But I think one of the things that I thought about in that moment was that, I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna redo it. I'm gonna have to redo it. And that's just what it is. Because the books this time around really provided some level of, I think I read them differently this time around. Last time I was talking about how, it's really interesting to start doing this, and how I'm really feeling invigorated by, reading as a practice now, more than I anticipated when I started doing these. But, how invigorated I am by just kind of by this practice, and how that's changing how I'm really approaching reading even the simplest of things. So yeah, I'm okay, I'll just have to redo it all over again. And I don't know if I'll bring as much pizzazz this time, but I'm sure we're going to get through it. And I'm recording on 2 screens because you're not going to catch me slipping twice. You're not going to catch me slipping twice. But yeah, so that was my preface. But a small preface, a little asterisk in between that. Kind of unconsciously, I know when I was picking out the children's books this time around, or within that library haul, I definitely got I grabbed books that were similar. I didn't necessarily consider that they would be books that were connected at all. I just was okay, I recognized that an author wrote 2 of these books, but I don't think I really consciously knew that I was picking that at the time. But subconsciously I divided up how to do these BB reads. I kind of just read as I go, but I kept splitting these up. And yeah, these books went together. And so I'll be talking about them in pairs this time, or at least 2 sets of the books that I'll be talking about. I'll be talking in pairs, and I thought that was I thought that was pretty cool too. But yeah, let me get into it, so I'm not here all day. Maple and Willow apart. Damn, the computer screen, it shows up bigger, so I have to. Maple and Willow Apart by Lori Nichols. Maple and Willow Together by Lori Nichols. And you may be like, well, eye-kuh, like, duh, these books were definitely connected. But I think I just picked these up based off of their, like, illustrations more than considering that these were the same author. But yeah, Maple and Willow Together, Maple and Willow Apart. So obviously both of these stories center the characters. Maple, who is the oldest. I'm trying to get both cameras in here, people. Maple, who is the oldest, that is shown on the cover, and Willow, who is the younger sister, also shown on the cover. And it obviously signals and describes their times when they are together versus when they are apart. Now, right side up, right? I really appreciated these stories because I think that, so within the story of Maple and Willow Together, it describes these sisters who spend much of their time together, playing together. They even have their own language that they abide by, and that was really nice to be named, because I think that personally with my siblings, I have that same kind of like dynamic where it's like we speak our own language sometimes, and it's very much so like between our dynamic. And so like I think having that, and like that language gets highlighted throughout the book some, and I really like that, because even though I really I'm sure the author made it pretty easy. It's written in Pig Latin in the book, but like it's still to signify that this language between these two siblings is between them. It is identifiable within their world, personal to their world. And I really I appreciated having that dynamic named in a children's book, because I think that it can teach a lot about like relationship and stuff like that. But okay, all right, moving on. And often how they spend time together, right? They may inevitably come upon some conflict. See, I knew this thing was gonna do this. Okay, they may inevitably come upon conflict, right? When maybe one sister doesn't want to play something, or someone may want to play something in a certain way and another doesn't. So within Maple and Willow Together, we see the closeness of the relationship, but we also, what's highlighted in this book is how, closeness, I think for me what I took away from it was closeness is developed, right? Like we are learning how to work with, even though there are definite commonalities or things that we can share amongst each other to formulate and make relating easy. Sometimes we just come upon the differences in our character, and may just come upon conflict in that. And how do we deal with this? How they came up with conflict resolution in the book was that they relied on this language, or they relied on their ability to play well together in order to resolve the conflict, which I think the conflict in the book was that one sibling wanted to play something differently than the other. And so really I think that like that was something that I kind of like grasped from this book. Look at me being nosy outside. But yeah, that was something that I grasped from reading Maple and Willow Together. And then within Maple and Willow Apart, oh wait, let me show you illustrations. I apologize. I'm like, what? See, a little bit of conflict, right? Because even though sometimes it's really fun to be with people that you like to be around, that you develop time and the whole language system with. But sometimes like certain times are like really incompatible, and so how can you, which is being shown within the pages that I'm showing you, how can they come to meet in the middle, right? How can they value the time that they spend together while also valuing the time at which sometimes they just may need to be apart, or they may need to do things differently in order to be together, you know? That it can't just be the same, and we may not always agree on everything. All of those things to say, right? Maple and Willow apart. And in the story, right, it says at the very beginning, Maple and Willow have always been inseparable. So what happens when Maple, right, the older sibling, starts big girl school, and Willow has to stay behind? Well, of course, both girls have marvelous adventures of their own, but the truth is they miss each other. And when they see that the missing is mutual, they find a unique way to feel connected even when they have to be apart. Easily said. I have to say, like, these stories in connection, I really like together. They don't necessarily have a similar plot line, if you will, but the characters aren't the same, and we definitely see Maple and Willow through a variety of situations, right? We see them through a variety of situations when they are together, how they are when they are together, but we also see Maple and Willow apart, or we also, within the book of Maple and Willow apart, we get the story of their time apart, which, right, Maple is going to school, Willow is staying at home. Maple is coming home with all of these fantastical stories about her time in kindergarten and what that means for her, and all of these adventures that she's going on, these friends that she's meeting. And Willow at home by herself, who is very much so connected to her sister, right? Like, they're in relationship with one another, in serious bond with one another. Through serious bond. Through the bond of their see, my thing kept pausing because that voice thing thought I was talking to it, but yeah, through their bond, right, like they spend time together, right, they want to spend time together, and or there's a very strengthened bond that they have together. And so as Maple is going off to school, Willow is needing to find time, going on her own adventures, figuring out how to necessarily adapt to the fact that her sister's bond is going to look, or her and her sister's like time together is going to look a lot different now that Maple is going to school. And so as Willow is, and I think that Willow handles this really well, because, you know, it can be really hard when we're used to spending time with someone, right? And this is at any point of our lives, when we are used to spending time with someone, like, you know, it can be a difficult adaptation for some to no longer spend time with that person as much. And even though there is like a lot to grieve in that, right? Willow was like, okay, I think that what was so important about it, which was highlighted in this book, right, was that Willow was like, yeah, I miss my sister, but I have to figure out something else to do while she's gone, and knowing that she'll come back at the end of the day, knowing that she'll like kind of, that there is something that they can rely on, both of them to rely on. That doesn't mean that just because this thing looks differently doesn't mean that it's that it's not available at all, right? And so Willow goes and she finds her own imaginative world, which I think I said yesterday so much, is that I really appreciated within the story, and like getting to know Maple and Willow, how often they use their imaginative minds. And I think that, I think that does really help with, I think, being able to, and at least in some ways, not necessarily in every single case, but in some ways, it can be very useful. That imaginative mind can be very useful in being able to have sustained time away from other people, from other things, da 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 da. Right, and so I really did appreciate that characteristic between Maple and Willow, because I think that strengthened their relationship, and also it reminded me of, once again, my relationship with my siblings and how we can definitely be very creatively and imaginatively like engaged, creatively and engaged in our imaginations, and that comes out in how we speak and talk and interact with one another, and definitely how we are able to resolve conflict at some point. But yeah, I love that, because Willow was able to go in and create kind of a world in which when Maple came home from school, she would be able to tell Maple, like, yeah, I went on my own adventures today. And that's when Maple was like, wait, like, this is a change. That was also a change for Maple, right? Like, from spending so much time with her sister and being at home with her sister to not being with her sister anymore. And even though Maple was going on to have her own adventures, you know, that there is still that connection and that bond that she still wants to cater to as well, that they both want to cater to. And so they were able to really be able to meet in the middle, once again, in both stories, which is what I loved about this series, right? Because it was like, it kind of told the same story in a different way through the same characters. But yeah, like how they were able to meet in the middle. And once again, when the weekends came, they spent their time together. And I just think that these stories were great to have in pair. Maple and Willow together, Maple and Willow apart. Let me make sure I said everything. Yeah, I appreciated that dynamic being spilled out. I'm gonna get some water though. I'm doing good so far. Doing okay. Alright, so my next pairs are Sky Color by Peter H. Reynolds and Ish by Peter H. Reynolds. So these pairs are connected by characters, but they're more so connected by storyline. Once again, Peter H. Reynolds wrote both Sky Color and Ish. And they're not connected by characters as much as they are connected by plotline, even though that there is a connection to characters. So within the story Ish, I'll read the beginning of it. Ramon loved to draw, which Ramon is here on the cover, running and drawing. Drawing is what Ramon does. It's what makes him happy. In one split second, however, all that is changed. A single reckless remark by his older brother Leon turns Ramon's once carefree expressions into joyless struggles. Lucky for Ramon, his younger sister Marisol sees the world differently. She opens his eyes to something far more valuable than getting things just right. So, once again, we have Ramon here on the cover, who is a lover of drawing, but with his brother's reckless remark of, what is that, right? Especially with something as expansive and as abstract as art is and can be, which life is that way also. Leon, I think is how you pronounce it. But you know what? If you're reading a story and you decide to pronounce a certain name a certain kind of way, especially when it's not intuitively clear, give yourself some grace for that. Give yourself some grace. But try. Leon, however you would like to pronounce it. His reckless remark of, okay, well, Ramon, listen, I know you drawing, but that doesn't look like at all what this is supposed to be, right? And so how discouraging of a comment that was to Ramon, who then decided to put all of his efforts into drawing things correctly and putting all of his efforts into drawing things exactly in the way that the greats have done it in the greats, right? Exactly in the way that it appears to be. And in that has found much discouragement. Ramon doesn't want to just... Ramon loves to draw. He loves the act and the practice of being with the art. And so kind of that comments from his older sibling at that, which we can think about that as a power dynamic or a social dynamic to understand within that as well, right? Discouraged Ramon. He was upset. He could not perform in the ways at which he was supposed to perform as to his brother's expectation of what art was. Boom, shakalaka. However, as Ramon is trying so effortlessly, or is trying with so much effort to perform and to still live up to this task, even in all of his frustration, he's throwing the paintings away, throwing all of the things that he's doing away because it cannot live up to the task. And then his younger sister Marisol comes around and she's like, hey, Ramon, what are you doing with these phenomenal paintings? Why are you continuously throwing these things away? And Ramon is like, well, because they're trash. Like, this is not good art. Like, this is not top tier. What the metrics say it needs to be, it's not what it's supposed to be, right? And Marisol is like, first off, Ramon, you talking wild. Come to my room. Let me show you something. And among Marisol's wall, you see all of Ramon's paintings or all of his drawings that looked very much so like ish, right? Even if it wasn't necessarily perfect, even if it wasn't like perfectly like squares and lines are exactly where they need to be, realistic drawing, right? Marisol pointed out, even still in Ramon's discouragement, like, why you got all of these paintings up? Why you got all of these drawings up? These are trash. These don't look anything how they're supposed to look. And Marisol is like, right. You're right. You're absolutely right. That's okay. It doesn't have to be an airplane. It can be airplane-ish. You see where the title's coming from now? my summary illustration. But yeah, it doesn't have to be a flower. It can be flower-ish. That is still drawing. That is still art. That is still the practice that you much so very find sacred and da-da-da-da. And so with that hint of encouragement from his baby sister, Marisol, which let me show you that illustration. Right, all of the art is on the wall. Da-da-da. Right? Boom, boom, boom. They-ish. They do look ish, he said. And so with that encouragement of ish, Ramon felt light and energized. Thinking ishly allowed his ideas to flow freely. He began to draw what he felt, loose lines, quickly springing out without worry. I don't want to read this entire thing because I don't like it. But Ramon once again drew the world around him, making an ish drawing felt wonderful. Right? So what I really loved about this story, was that things sometimes just exist within the ish, right? Like, things aren't often in these very binary codes of black and white, of 1 and 2, right? That there is an ish space that exists in that sometimes, a lot of times, more often than we realize, that ish space is occupied, that we occupy it, that so much of life occupies that ish space, and that not getting it, and there may be something to getting it within the perfect lines of what we think the perfect lines are, but then there's also a lot of abundance and value and sacredness within the ish too, that can be spraying forth within us and outside of us at any time that we so choose, as long as we choose to respect the ish. Respect the ish. So yes, I loved the story of Ramon and him finding his ish, and him embracing it, right? Embracing his ish. I think in one part of the book it goes from like, you know, he's doing ish drawings to doing ish poetry, and I'll see if I can find that one because I like the little poem they inserted in the story. Let me show more of this. But yeah, his ish art inspired ish writing. He wasn't sure if he was writing poems, but he knew they were poem-ish. So the little poem that they wrote in here was ponder. Ponder, dream yonder, pond, yond, gleam, wander. And I was like, that is so adorable to me. That is absolutely phenomenal to me because that really drove that home in such a simple way. And what I also liked about Peter H. Reynolds in this particular text too was that the drawings of the illustrations of the book kind of felt in alignment with ish. So I'm not necessarily sure of the author entirely, but I wonder if this story was inspired from some point in his life or whatnot, right? Even if not like directly. So yeah, I felt like his drawings were very ish drawings and ish illustrations, which I feel like created this book even in its in its fundamental state to be engaging and yeah, all of those things. So within Sky Color, remember within these pairs, it's not necessarily the characters that link us together. Although Marisol, this story centers Marisol, which is Ramon's younger sister that we learned about in Ish. But she's not necessarily having conversations or interactions with her brothers in this particular book. I'm not sure if Peter H. Reynolds has any more books where they may do some more interacting, but yeah, this story centers Marisol. And yeah, let's just do it from here. Marisol is ready to paint the sky for the class mural, but she can't find the color she thinks that she needs, which is typically the color blue. And so she can't find this color that she needs in order to paint this class mural amongst her other classmates. And so that really puts her in a very down, bad mood. She's really not feeling it. She's really not, she's very confused as to how she's going to finish this painting if she doesn't have the color blue. You can just be like, well, Marisol, just go ask the teacher to get some more color blue. But as the story goes, that's not what Marisol does. On her way home, right, she gets a day or so to think it over. And as she is on her way home, right, and she's looking out the window of the bus, she notices the sky, the sun-setting sky, the sun that's lowering across the horizon, or closer to the horizon. She's noticing the sun. She's noticing the sky at this point, and she's recognizing that it's not blue. And even as she goes further into the day, right, recognizing the many different colors that exist in the sky, recognizing that not only blue exists, not this perfectly blue color at all times. Let me get the thing. And what I really want to point out within the illustrations of this book is that for the most part, before the pages that I just showed full of color, the story mainly happens in like this very neutral tone of like gray and yeah, like a brownish gray, right? And the only thing that has like color outside of that are the drawings, are the paintings, are any art that is involved within the story. And I think that once again, Peter H. Reynolds was very considerate of that, and how he and how that fed into the story as well, right? Because Metasol is an artist, and you know, where there can be so many colors, we're really highlighting once again sky color. And so having this kind of like dried out or this drowned out tone until we get to the parts of the book where Marisol is beaming into the sky color and looking into the sky color. And even one of my favorite pages, right? Just being inspired by, once again, this ish space. So even though like the stories, or even though the characters weren't connected, I still felt like there was this theme that Peter H. Reynolds kind of played upon within both stories, maybe once again in different ways, but that things exist in this ish space, that things don't always exist in this perfect XYZ kind of way, and that when we're open to life and we're open to the many things that live within the ish space, whether that's inside of us, right, which Ramon had to find for himself and to embrace within himself, or whether or not we see it outside of us, right, within the sky that is not just always blue. Yeah. we may with these dynamics being brought to the center, and hopefully encouraged if you decide to read this, and or if you just kind of like take from that, but like, you know, that I'm losing my train of thought because that Carmex y'all, but yeah, Peter H. Reynolds really brought both of these dynamics forward in two different ways, and existing within the ish. And I'm really taking that into consideration now, like, right, that the ish exists within myself, outside of myself, and taking and looking towards that for inspiration, or looking towards that as a sacred space for myself to be held and for life to be held. We may begin to see and embrace all of the possibilities that life has for us, and hopefully in some ways, right, create very beautiful things from it, as does Ramon and Ish, and Marisol and Sky Color. I didn't say this for the last book, and I'm going to come back to this, but for Maple and Willow apart and together, I would definitely have these on my bookshelf, because I think that they would be really good places to kind of talk about relating and relationship, and how maybe the forms, or not the forms, the form of bonds that you, the bonds that you form with other people, what that may look like. How do you embrace closeness? How do you embrace being apart from people that you're really comfortable with, or that you like being with, right? That you bond with, right? How do you resolve conflict with those people, right? And that's going to look different for each and every person, right? And we only got, within Maple and Willow, we only got the tale of how these two, Maple and Willow, are able to do this with the dynamics that they live in, with the help and the things that they have. Their parents are not present in these books, but, you know, with the tools and the things that they have, how they are able to be together, to bond, to resolve conflict. But this could be, at least for any age level, for any and all age levels, right? Just a conversation into that, right? Maybe you can take something from that and see it within your own relationships and bonding. So yes, I would have these on my shelf. With Sky Color and Ish, I can see myself having these on the shelf too, and definitely reading it a few times to engage in, I could probably create some really cool projects and curriculums from these two reads. as well as like literally on all age levels. I would encourage you, if you could, to see if you can find some way to make the work that you do, or to get into yourself creatively and find your ish space, even if you're doing analytics or something, you're doing something very sciencey that seems to be very rigid and by the numbers. See if there's some ish space within that, which we've learned anything when I talked about lemonade code, we should know. We should know. But yeah, with this sky color, definitely I always say this, but like, go look at stuff. Like go be amazed by the many things that exist within the surroundings that you have. And I should say amazing, but I don't want to fantasize every single aspect of it. But like, if there is a way for if there is space for you to look into that may inspire beauty, or a bigger beautiful picture to be considered, then I would encourage that as well. So yeah, those two books. More water. All right, y'all, I got 2 more books, but these don't come in pairs. As I do, and as I said I do, when I get children's books, I always kind of get other books to like read in between, because I'll just go through children's books really fast. I can go through children's books pretty quickly. So I try to get like a novel or something in there as well that would be more like prolonged reading. But sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And then, yeah. The novel that I got last time, or this time around, was We Are Mesquakie, We Are One, and this is by Hadley Irwin. And I want to make the note about the authors that Hadley Irwin is the pen name of Lee Hadley and Annabelle Irwin, both native Iowans that teach in the English department of Iowa State University. But I wanted to mention that they are native Iowans who wrote this book, and I think that that's really important to note, because this book is about the story of one singular person, of the Mesquakie people, who have existed within this nation that we know currently as the United States, currently as the United States. But I always bring up this point now to myself that if just comparing time, let me put this book down for a second, thinking about it, right, that the United States of America is only about not even 300 years old, y'all. Not even 300 years old. So consider, and that this land, this space, this earthly existence, humans' existence, have existed far longer than 300 years. That's just the facts that's there. And so considering that, specifically for this space of the United States of America, that in order for it to be this, right, especially when there were previous millions of people already existing on this land, I encourage you, if you are not familiar with whose land this was prior to United States colonialism, settler colonialism, prior to the United States settler colonialism, trying to say too many words at once, then I would look through that, and I would post that link. I tend to post it quite often, but it is Whose Land Am I On? If you do a quick Google search, it should come up. And whatever location that you're in, it will tell you the name of the First Nations people that existed here, and that may as well still exist here. Who lived here prior to settler colonialism on this land. So, would really get into that. So I brought up that with the authors as well, because the Mesquakie people are native to Iowa, and I think that's all I wanted to say about that, actually. Yeah, they are native to Iowa. And so even though that is considered a U.S. territory now, right? A state under the U.S. law of states and da-da-da-da, that prior to that, there were the existence of Mesquakie people who tended to and held tradition and held their descendants on this land for quite some time. Way longer periods of time than the United States have been formed. Important to say that. But we are Mesquakie. We are one. Tells a true story from Native American history through the voice of a young Native American girl, Hidden Doe. Hidden Doe is coming of age in the 1840s, 30 years before the emancipation of slaves, by the way, at a time when the United States government is forcing her people, the Mesquakie, to leave their homeland in Iowa and make the long and bitter journey to a Kansas reservation. So what was very interesting about this read, and I think I started to talk about this already, was that like my approach to books, this is, let me be clear, this is how thick this is. It's not, I think it is about 115 pages. It's a very straightforward read. I don't necessarily find that it has too much complicated language, too much of like edited English. I think it's meant to be very simple, especially considering that the Mesquakie people's native tongue is not in English. And once again, the authors teach English, so I'm sure they know it, but I think in order to convey the story of a young Mesquakie girl who is coming of age in a time where English is important for her to know because of the fact that settler colonialism is happening, but it's not a language that at the time of the story and at the start of the story that she speaks. So like, in order for like, the reader to read it, an English reader to read it, it is translated in English, but it is, I think that the story is narrated and spoken from Hidden Doe's perspective in a very simple way for that reason. So I don't think that there's any complicated language depending on how fast you read. It's a pretty smooth read, I will say. Right. I will say also that it is heavily, much more descriptive of land than of like plot line and story, which I find that I kind of run into a lot when I read like novels based or written by Indigenous First Nations people, is that there tends to be a very precise description of the land. I don't know if I should say precise, but there is a focus and emphasization on what the land holds, on the character of the land within the story. And so reading this, it will kind of like, you will have to kind of like engage that like that landscape that like Hidden Doe is living on. But as I was saying before, one of the things that I was talking about is that like my approach to reading has changed. And so I didn't necessarily catch it as I was reading this story, but I think that after I read this story, I have been considering, what have I been considering? I've been considering like the dynamics within the story, like within the stories that I read, right? The social dynamics, the power dynamics that are within the stories that is being told, whether that's through a true narrative or through like, a story like Sky Color. I'm thinking about the power dynamics and the social dynamics that allow for this story to be told in this kind of way. And so as I was reading this, I'm like, okay, like I'm reading Hidden Doe's story, but I still felt very detached from her story, not necessarily considering all of the aspects that really create the dynamic and for within the story to be impactful. And so one of the things that came to me after was, and I read it in the description, is that at this time, right, Hidden Doe is coming of age, right? She's a girl that within her people that has a particular significance, and she has to learn some traditions, some rites of passage, some things that she has to do, and she's coming of age in this time where like it's important for her to know these traditions, but also settler colonialism is happening, where so much of her traditions and so much of the traditions that make her people are tied to this to this land, are not tied to, connected to this land, is connected to their way and their way of seeing and understanding and knowing the world. And that is being actively, as Hidden Doe is coming of age, being taken from them. They're being actively displaced as this is happening. And so, and I think that once I started to think of it, the story really started to come together in my mind, and I really started to not necessarily identify with Hidden Doe, because that isn't necessarily my experience, but I was able to embody and kind of get into her shoes a lot more and really understand the impact that this could have had on her at the time. And not fully at all, but like the impact that this could have had on her family, and just really the way of the Mesquakie people at the time. And they were not isolated in this incident at all whatsoever. The history of the process of colonization is a long one. It is still currently happening. And so, yeah, y'all. I really think that this was a really great entry point. And I think that even if you're not familiar with that long process of colonization has been, what it looks like, what I'm even talking about when I say colonization, right? I feel like this story, We Are Mesquakie, We Are One, speaks to that from a very simplistic first point of view of Hidden Doe, right? A young girl coming of age in this time, where this displacement is actively happening, where the displacement of her people, of her traditions, this breaking of her, of what really ties her, I don't want to say ties her, but like really connects her to the land, right? This is one thing that was said in this book was that, we, and they were talking about the Mesquakie people, we may die, we may be buried, but the land lives on. And so, it was important for them to attain and have that land to be connected to. And so to really, I think, like, once again, I was able to really sit within that perspective for a little bit, and not just like read the story and be like, this was a nice told story. It was like, this was a story that really, I feel like shifts like your perception of reality, and has the ability to shift the perception, that perspective, of a person, and what dynamics they find themselves in, and how they could or they couldn't respond, and how characters within these times, when we consider these dynamics as well, how they are and are not able to respond. So hidden, and trust me that those things, I say that very plainly, but like the effects of settler colonialism were drastic, right? Being moved, they weren't moving in cars, they were moving on foot, right? Which wasn't necessarily foreign to them. It wasn't foreign for them to walk long distances and travel long distances on foot. It wasn't foreign to them, but they were being displaced and lied to at the same time. They were being told that, hey, in Kansas there's fruitful lands, like, yes, we are coming to take your land, and you can't say anything about it, because if you do say something about it, we will just like kill you, ? Right? And right? Like, so either that, or you can move to this land that has better promises for you. And so then they do that, but then they get to this land, and then it's really made out to be a reservation reserved away from white settlers who are foreign, truly. And with how it is cut and chopped, and how it has been divided, right? That they're, like I said, with Hidden Doe, like their traditions, their practices come from the land, right? So like her need to forge certain medicines, the men in her family being able to hunt and knowing when to hunt, right? When you messing up the whole system, and you not being respective of the cycles that are there, right? Then hunting season produces little crop, right? So they're really having to try to adapt and try to survive at the same time. Then they're having to combat illnesses being brought over. And so really this time that Hidden Doe is coming up in is very traumatic and very drastic for her. She's losing a lot of family, and she's losing her family quickly because their defenses against something like this was unprecedented, right? Like they have to now pay money that they weren't necessarily utilizing before in order to gain access to things that were very much so that they preoccupied beforehand. And that doesn't exist to say that wars and conflicts didn't happen prior to that. I'm just saying that settler colonialism definitely did a very drastic, and is doing a very drastic act through these processes, and it has caused a lot of havoc. And we learn this, I feel like, once again, in a simple way. It doesn't necessarily get into like the blood goringly details of everything, but it does speak to Hidden Doe's loss along the way. Yeah. I would say the only thing that I have like against this book is that I didn't necessarily always agree with Hidden Doe's decisions. Specifically towards the end, and I won't name what those are, but I don't always agree with Hidden Doe's decision, but I am, once again, in my reading different, trying to consider the dynamics that were present. And I don't necessarily understand all of the ways, and this book will not highlight it for you whatsoever, all of the ways and the traditions and the values that the Mesquakie people held, and how that also influenced Hidden Doe's decisions. But I think that this, once again, I would have it on my shelf because I think that it is a good entry point, and I do like books that make kind of a very vast history and a vast knowledge of things. I like that there can be an access point for any and all kind of learners. That's. I also did, because this book was written for the time period of the 1840s, and I wondered as I was reading it, like, if there are any indigenous texts or novels or whatever that include of the time, which I'm sure there are, because there's a spiritual practice that claims that First Nations people in this enslaved people on this land within the United States definitely had contact and in some ways relationships with one another, in some kind of relationship with one another. I'm not saying that's always positive, but I do know that that's a true thing. But I wonder if there are any First Nations texts written during this time period that may speak to what they have seen, or what that could have been like, looking at it from their perspective. So yeah, We Are Mesquakie, We Are One by Hadley, Irwin. Oh, last one, y'all. I knew this was gonna be a lot. That's why I was so mad that it ate my video, because I was like, really? And I was on the last one. working on this one. Okay. My last one. Rethinking Schools, an Agent for Change. Rethinking Schools, an Agenda for Change. This is written by a lot of different folks, but who's listed on the cover as putting this book together is Lisa Delpit, Henry Louis Gates Jr., Herbert Kohl, Howard Zinn, and others. And remind you, I'm going to put all of that in the caption, so you don't got to worry about it. I will make it accessible. Edited by David Levine, Robert Lowe, Bob Peterson, and Rita Tenorio. So this book was really important for me to get. Super duper important for me to get. It's kind of thick. So it's a thicker read. It's a texty read. 280 plus pages. It's a texty read. But this book I had to get. I think a lot about school curriculum as I'm going through these books. That should be obvious. But I think a lot about school curriculum. I think a lot about putting learning programs together, which if you stick with me through BB Reads and through BB and Honey period, those will be coming out at some point. To be determined. But yeah, I think about like putting together learning programs that are accessible and fundamental, that are intergenerational all the time. And so I've been really gearing my focus and my research towards that, right? Towards thinking about how schools are ran, thinking about teaching, thinking about just like kind of like this entire thing. And so while I was getting these children's books, the first time around, I was like, I saw this book and I was like, oh, I got too much to do, because I grabbed those other texty psychological reads that I talked about in the last one. But like, I saw this book and I was like, I gotta get this book, and I definitely have to I have to get it. Like, I have to absolutely get it. I took a picture of it and everything. And shortly after, I pretty much zoomed through them other books just so I can get this one. But I had to get it. Because not even because. Yeah, I just really had to get this book. And so this book is very highly informational. This is around, let's see if there's any. I don't think so. And that's okay if it's not. If it's any short acknowledgement of how to describe this book. If it's not necessarily clear from the title, which it may not be, this is a book that speaks to the many different layers and the aspects from different researchers, teachers, scholars, folks who have worked in the school system, contributing their thoughts around how to reform schools. How to reform schools, but the reformation of schools to be more, within this book they talk about to be more inclusive, right? To be more uplifting for the children, for the teachers, for the community, how to, the kind of the issues. Also, this book also brings about a lot of critiques about the current process, the current structure of school systems, which this book was written in the 1990s, but I will say that a lot of things still, at least from my school experience, even up until college, like I can say that this book had a lot of resonance in that. But just really considering those dynamics or critiquing those dynamics, the structures of schools as they exist, and how, not even necessarily giving like long-term effects, but really giving kind of their thoughts and opinions based on their experiences and their observations and their research and the data of how like reform solutions, right? So not everything is solution oriented, but everything does necessarily get to a point to be considered towards solution. saying it. I'm trying to say it neatly. But yeah, I really appreciated this book. Once again, it was brought together by Rethinking Schools, which is a publication that still exists, that is still releasing, I think, journal publications, which I do hope to sign up for at some point. And so they're still active in their work. But this book particularly was collected a lot of voices. And so there's not one person that this is written by. There's a few different people, but this book is divided into parts. And these parts are speaking to a particular aspect or a dynamic within school systems that need to be considered, modified, restructured, reformed, recognized as a need for transformation. All of the above. And so to kind of go over some of the parts, part 1 was about multiculturalism and anti-bias education. And so that part was really talking about the fact that, to put it simply, right, that the school systems, especially within inner city schools, hold, specifically within the United States, we have to consider this, right? Specifically within the United States, when we have high immigration patterns here, right? And their immigration patterns, we have colonization, we got a lot of processes, a lot of historical migration movements that allows and that has brought people to live in this space, all different kinds of people from all different parts of the world. And so we may have within our classrooms kids and children, students from all of these different kinds of backgrounds, from all different kinds of cultural backgrounds, from different socioeconomic backgrounds. You may have kids who are richer and wealthier. You may have kids who may be living under the poverty line. You may have kids with that live live in a nuclear family, while you may have children who are born and are raised by single mothers or single parents, or, a guardian, right? Like, you have all different kinds of children in your classroom. And so how can the curriculum, how can the curriculum and how can teachers, how can people who participate in the school system in general consider all of these differences that may exist in the classroom, right? Especially when, and then the second part, they talk about rethinking curriculum, but I think that these two parts go together, because it's like, especially when you think about how the curriculum is shaped to center a specific voice, whiteness. it is created to center whiteness, to center and still propel white supremacy. So like, it's like, when these curriculums are geared towards this, how can we actually really even be including the many different voices in the classroom, especially when it's like, okay, like, you have to track these kids and they have to know this particular knowledge, and they are not tested on the knowledge of their dialect, or, their background, their social dynamics that actually play out, right? We learn about this history, we learn about this world, and we learn of it outside of the dynamics that we actually exist in. You're going to hear me say that word a lot, dynamics. We live outside of, or we learn outside of the dynamics that we live in. We don't necessarily learn about, like, okay, well, why? And that's a bigger question, but, like, why is it that the nuclear family is considered to be the stable family, but, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's not the situation that I grew up in, and Like, what are the dynamics that really shape the world that we live in, and how can the classroom be a place that we learn about those dynamics truthfully and honestly, right? Like, to actually prepare. And to what this book actually highlights too is, like, not even to just prepare children for the real world, but to make them actual social instigators from the moment that they are able to be social, because they are already instigating up against that. They are already having those questions. And even when I think back to my own childhood, and I think about being in the classroom and how often I would take the knowledge that I was being given and, like, trying to and considering how that was actually playing out into the world. And I still do that. Like, that's how my mind thinks. So it's like really considering, right, how this information applies in the context of my realities, right, within the confines of my realities. And so this book, within the first two parts, right, with multiculturalism and anti-bias education, and within rethinking the curriculum, really gets into those political dynamics in the classrooms. And I have to say this because this book brought it up so perfectly, right? That the school is a political place. The school is a political place. When textbook companies are owned by these people who have been funded, when they are owned by someone who is more concerned about profit, and that their way of determining, and this book explains this well too, but like the only way that they can determine a student's achievement and agility and thinking and criticism and is through these standardized tests based on this material, this very limited material written by textbook companies who often are not invested in multicultural education. They are not invested in the fact that that there are multiple people that exist and from all different backgrounds. I think there's a particular part within this book written by someone who looks at the number of times a certain kind of ethnic group is mentioned in comparison to white, and how that was drastically less, even in very important sections where slavery was mentioned, right? Of like who, like these textbook companies are not highlighting those materials at all. And I cannot speak for how those that exist today at all, because I haven't been in school in a while. But even when I was reading another textbook that I never talked about on here, I definitely found myself questioning a lot, like, well, how would this show up in Black communities? How would this show up in Black communities? How would this show up in Black communities? And I find myself asking that question a lot more, especially when in comparison, like, you know, a lot of things are geared towards whiteness, or the backdrop is whiteness. And so within these first two chapters, once again, these educators are bringing about the benefits of a multicultural and anti-bias education, and also the effects of not having that in the classrooms, and also how they have to work around, even though there's considerable evidence towards why multicultural and anti-bias education would be beneficial. They still have to work around it because as change is slowly being made, because to include a multicultural program or multicultural curriculum and anti-bias curriculum, right, would mean that the test-taking measures that are presented within textbooks or within the dominant school curriculum may not be suitable. And so for them to change that will take avid work. And so this book talks about that too. It talks about tracking and standardized testing, which there's plenty of support and plenty of research on why standardized testing is not beneficial for all groups of children, of all students. Testing, especially in the way that it is presented, and especially like how it can be so centered on someone's grade. It's like there's plenty of research that speaks to the fact that may not be beneficial for all students that move through the educational process in any kind of way. And so, yeah, this book really is just trying to expand and reshape our understanding of how schools can be structured in order to anticipate the many different kinds of folks that and make room for all the many different kinds of people that may move through their classrooms. Another part that I actually loved was whole language. I loved around this part around rethinking curriculum, even thinking about bringing in the fact that, because I love language learning, it's something that I do often, but I often think about, like, if I have multiple people from different backgrounds in a language learning class, that could just be like, okay, I'm teaching you Spanish, right? I'm teaching you some particular language, but I think language learning should be kind of grouped together because language is an active function. And so, like, even though, like, there's something like language arts where we learn the perfections of edited English, which was coined in this book, I really think that was a perfect term. Edited English being this very formal, highly spoken, perfect, grammatically correct English. How edited English... What's that going with this? How did I say this? How did I set this sentence up? But yeah, how that... Let me see. Teaching standard. I'm like hearing noises. Maybe that's why. But yeah, how teaching... but teaching the standard English, when there is more focus on that, right? Within language arts, right? Like, how can we embrace the fact that, like, okay, just to put it simply, like, I'm Black, and so, like, how I speak, right, within Black communities, right, which has been coined and termed as African American vernacular English, right? Ebonics, if you want to call it that, but really just, like, you know what I'm saying, how Black people talk, it's been co-opted into being internet language now. But the fact is that this language, right, this functional language that we utilize and that we understand within Black spaces has rules. It has grammar functions. Like, this is why, like, even though it's being co-opted as, like, you know, English or internet slang, that, like, you can't really co-opt it unless you really know and be around Black people, y'all. Like, it's not... Like, it's being very weird. But yeah, like, how can we even incorporate that as a valid and a valuable way of communicating within our classrooms, right? And necessarily, these textbooks, companies ain't gonna be able to invest in that specifically, but, like, you know, where can room be created within our curriculums? Where can room be created in our school systems to incorporate and to highlight that as valuable ways to communicate as well, especially, like, once again, if there are people who speak more than one language, or I think about that as far as, like, you know, First Nations people being in and I say classrooms, but I would like to say learning spaces instead, because this book also starts to talk about, I don't think in part 4 it talks about, in beyond the classroom, national policy concerns. And in that, is it this one? Within national policy concerns. Within coming to terms with violence in our schools, which is another book that I'll have to read at some point soon. It's on my list, but the school to prison pipeline, and just, I read an article, a very interesting article, that talked about how schools are designed, especially inner city schools are designed, with the same architectural concept as prisons. And so, yeah, really thinking about that, like, really wanting to reshape that language around classrooms and school, and really more so wanting to think about learning spaces. Learning is a thing that constantly happens, in my opinion, and you don't necessarily need school to do that, though you may need facilitated learning spaces by folks and by, you know, educators who seek to create learning spaces for all ages and all of those kinds of things. But I think I want to just move away from that, right? But how can we incorporate the differences in language within our learning spaces, right? Especially if we have people, because though language is a living, breathing thing, it depends on the people living and breathing to speak it. And so when we think about First Nations folks, and this is a goal that I want to get into myself, but considering how we can be involved in learning those languages too, and how we can incorporate those First Nations languages into language learning as well. But I'm getting all into my own ideas and personal desires. Some other things that was talked about in this book, I'll read some of these, but like a lot of these articles was just hitting it for me. So multiculturalism, a conversation among different voices, taking multicultural anti-racist education seriously. If you want to go down the rabbit holes, you can look into critical race theory, which a lot of educators are on Instagram, like hashtag critical race theory, and or Google it. But a lot of educators are have been working to put this and to adapt this into their curriculum, at which it isn't necessarily being done on its own. Even though, if you've been paying attention to the news recently, they just banned it in schools, even though it wasn't being incorporated to begin with. And I don't know if that was just in Texas, but yes. How well are we nurturing racial and ethnic diversity? Trouble over the rainbow. Are we accepting too much? And that speaks to, right, the fact that not every family, not every student, even in our textbooks, that I know we are like, oh, they want to rub off on us, the LGBTQ, but it's like literally all textbooks include cishet normative, like, kind of rhetoric, right? And this is what I also mean, like, by people may not actually live and exist in those social dynamics. And so, like, why not teach the fact that in reality, not everyone comes from a family with a mother and a father and like, not everybody has this Western concept of family. So yes, are we accepting too much trouble over the rainbow? Rethinking the curriculum. Discovering Columbus, rereading the past, because, you know, as we know, we learned a lot about who sailed the ocean blue and was a great voyager, but at the expense of who? At the expense of what? We talked about colonialism, settler colonialism, so we don't need to get into it again, but thinking of that, right? Like, you know, that's what's being taught and tested on within these school systems for children and students to know. And so how does that actually actively help us engage with the world around us when we face active violence, especially, like, you know, once again, coming from so many different backgrounds, when we're facing active violence and we say, oh, well, that's a voyager, that's a man, because he can trample over any objects and he can do all of these things. But, like, you know, for someone who is woman, for someone who is a person of color, for someone who is Black, like, that doesn't necessarily give them the tools to be a social, I don't want to say activist, because I don't necessarily think that it has to be this overriding thing, but to be to actually be able to deal with the context of your reality, right? Like, no, this is not no voyager. Christopher Columbus wasn't no voyager. Like, he was many other things, but he wasn't that. And so, right, how can the teachers or educators, how can we be more honest and pervasively honest and also completely eradicate the fact that this is being taught in this way? So yeah, going through it, right? We have no reason to celebrate an invasion. What should children learn? I really like that one. I won't get into what that one was about, but it was talking about a popular educator who was writing these books of what should children learn at each grade level, and how it was missing a whole lot of things. And that mad curriculums were based off that thing. Why students should study history, distorting Latino culture. Within language arts, the Lorax, Dr. Seuss Revisited and Revised. That was a perfectly said article. I'll probably have to talk about that separately. Who's Standard? Teaching Standard English in our schools. Teachers, Culture, and Power. Part 3 was stratification in the classroom, testing and tracking. Is your child being tracked? Standardized tests, a clear and present danger. Part 4, Beyond the Classroom, National Policy Concerns, the Perils of School Vouchers. Is public school choice a viable alternative, especially when you have things like redlining, where public school choice wasn't firstly available due to segregation and all of those things that was happening at the time, as well as now this is an alternative that's being opened up around this time to be able to alleviate those differences. But really, that article by Ann Bastian is questioning that. So, coming to terms with violence in our schools, the hollow promise of youth apprenticeships. So, beyond the classroom, national policy concerns. I think that's really important because, once again, schools are political places, and that unions, even like, parent unions or whatever that happen within schools, like your local politicians, they have principals. The school system isn't just teachers, students, and the administration. Like, these things are being kind of discussed in a national way, and it's shaping the way that schools are ran. So I think that having an understanding of the national policies, that the policies that are being created locally that are kind of, widening nationally are important to really understand is happening as a part of school systems and to be critiqued as part of school reform. And then part 5, building a community, teachers, students, and parents. Beyond pizza sales, parent involvement in the 1990s, teachers through history, the myth of a golden age, which was really good because it kind of busted the myth that teaching as a profession started to be this little house on the prairie with this nice teacher in there. Like, it started off men working there and teaching, and then it got handed off to women as the identity of teacher began to change, and along with war, I forget what war at the time, but the war at the time drafting men. And so there were less positions for men to fill in that way. Women had to take on those roles. Teachers got associated with more of a caring and a nurturing position, which got handed off to women. Thought that was a very interesting read, because then it talks about kind of how that even plays into how we understand our school systems and how they are funded, how they are treated. Preparing teachers for education in a diverse world. Sorry. That was my hurry up and get off of here. Which side are you on? The role of teachers' unions in school reform. All children are our children. So, it goes through a lot of different points through this book, and it gives you a lot of resources, like the resources page in the back. And I almost find it unfair to get books like this from the library for myself, because this is a kind of book where I'm like, I need to circle, scratch, highlight, I need to do all of these things. But luckily enough, this book is only $9 on Thrift Books, so I'm going to get it so that I can definitely take a lot of notes. I started a little Google Docs, or a notes section to write down things that I thought were really important to remember, just off my first hand reading it before I get the book for myself. But yes, if anybody still happens to pick up this book and even just read you don't even have to read all of it. You don't even got to read every single part. But if you just pick it up and you wait, I'm going to go look into that a little bit more, or I'm going to read just one part of it, and you want to talk about it with me, please do. So yes, 100% will have this on my shelf. Okay. Sorry if you had on headphones. That's me talking a lot. Anyway, I really have fun doing this again. Until the next time, I don't know what we're going to do next time. I'm going to keep it funky. But until next time, y'all.